What if the person hired to protect you became the very thing you needed protection from? On the surface, it seems simple. Hire a bodyguard, stay safe, return to normal life. That's what celebrity photographer Isabella Chen thought when death threats started arriving at her doorstep. She did everything right, hired the best security firm, followed every protocol, trusted the professionals. But here's what they don't tell you about protection. The line between guardian and captor is thinner than you think. And sometimes, the person watching you the closest sees things they were never meant to see, knows things they should never know, wants things they can never have. This is the story of how protection became possession, how safety became surveillance, how a professional arrangement spiraled into something far more dangerous than the original threat. Because Isabella Chen's stalker wasn't the one she should have feared most. And by the time she realized it, there was nowhere left to run. Pause. But to understand how everything went so catastrophically wrong, we need to go back to the beginning. To understand not just what happened, but why it was inevitable from the very first moment they met. 6 months before everything fell apart, Isabella Chen was at the height of her career. At 28, she'd photographed everyone who mattered: actors, musicians, politicians, royalty. Her work had appeared on the cover of Vogue, Vanity Fair, and Time. She had 3 million Instagram followers, a penthouse in Manhattan, and invitations to every exclusive event in the city. But success comes with a price, and for women in the public eye, that price is often paid in safety. The first letter arrived on a Tuesday morning in March, slipped under her studio door. Nothing threatening, not yet, just intimate, too intimate, details about her morning routine, the coffee shop she visited, the color of the dress she'd worn the previous Thursday. Someone was watching. The second letter arrived 3 days later, then another, each one more detailed than the last, each one crossing boundaries that made her skin crawl. By the 10th letter, the tone had changed. The admiration had curdled into something darker. You think you're untouchable, you think you're safe in your ivory tower, but I see you, Isabella, I see everything, and soon you'll see me too. That's when her manager, David Park, insisted on hearing protection. Not just any protection, the best. Which is how Isabella found herself sitting across from Marcus Rivera on a gray Monday morning, trying not to show how scared she actually was. Marcus Rivera was 34 years old and had spent the last 12 years in private security after leaving the Navy SEALs. 6'3", broad-shouldered, with dark eyes that seemed to catalog everything in a single glance. He had a reputation for being the best close protection officer in New York City, professional, efficient, and completely invisible when he needed to be. His resume was flawless. Former military, decorated service, psychological screening passed with flying colors. 3 years with the Secret Service before going private. References from senators, CEOs, A-list celebrities. No scandals, no complaints, no red flags. On paper, Marcus Rivera was exactly what Isabella needed. But here's what the background check didn't show. Marcus had spent his entire adult life learning to control himself, to suppress his emotions, to maintain perfect discipline in every situation. And suppression is not the same as absence. When you spend years teaching yourself not to feel, not to want, not to need, when you finally do, it doesn't emerge gradually. It erupts, and it erupts with the force of everything you've been denying. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to that first meeting. Isabella's first impression of Marcus was simple, safe. He didn't make small talk, didn't smile unnecessarily, didn't look at her the way most men did, like she was a photograph come to life, an object to be admired. He looked at her the way he looked at everything else, analytically, professionally, as a problem to be solved. The threat level is moderate to high, Marcus explained, his voice even and controlled. Statistically, most stalkers escalate. Yours is demonstrating classic obsessive patterns with increasing boundary violations. We need to assume physical confrontation is not just possible, but probable. He outlined the security protocol with military precision. He would be with her 24/7. He would sleep in the guest room of her penthouse. He would accompany her to every shoot, every meeting, every event. He would screen her mail, monitor her digital presence, coordinate with local police. "I understand this is intrusive," Marcus said, "but effective protection requires access to your schedule, your home, your life. If you're not comfortable with that level of proximity, we should discuss alternative arrangements." Isabella looked at this serious, controlled man who radiated competence and thought, "I can handle this. It's temporary, just until they catch whoever's sending the letters." She had no idea she was inviting something far more dangerous than her stalker into her home. The first week was professional, painfully so. Marcus was a shadow, always there, always watchful, but never intrusive. He stood outside the bathroom door while she showered, waited in the corner during her photo shoots, sat in her living room while she worked in her home office. But he never spoke unless spoken to, never offered opinions on anything beyond security. Isabella found it oddly comforting. After years of people constantly wanting something from her time, her attention, her image, Marcus wanted nothing. He was just there, a solid, reliable presence between her and the chaos of the world. But here's what she didn't understand about protection. Proximity breeds familiarity, and familiarity breeds something else entirely. By the second week, Marcus knew everything about her. He knew she drank her coffee black with exactly 1 sugar, that she worked best between midnight and 3 a.m., that she called her mother every Sunday at noon, that she bit her lower lip when she was concentrating, that she hummed when she cooked, that she had a scar on her left shoulder from a childhood bike accident. He knew which friends she trusted and which ones she merely tolerated. He knew her passwords, her routines, her fears. He knew the sound of her footsteps on hardwood floors and the exact pitch of her laugh when something genuinely amused her versus when she was being polite. He knew her. And knowing her, Marcus began to realize something that terrified him. He wanted to keep knowing her. For a man who had spent 12 years in the business of protection, who had guarded diplomats and CEOs and celebrities without incident, this was unprecedented. Marcus had always prided himself on his professionalism, on his ability to remain detached, to see his clients as assignments, not people. But Isabella was different. Or perhaps more accurately, Isabella made him different. He noticed things he shouldn't notice. The way her hair caught the light, the elegant line of her neck when she was looking at her camera, the sound of her voice when she was on the phone with someone she loved. At first, Marcus told himself it was normal. That noticing details was part of his job. That understanding his clients' patterns and behaviors made him better at protecting her. But he knew he was lying to himself. Because he thought about her when he wasn't working, dreamed about her at night, found himself looking forward to mornings just so he could see her emerge from her bedroom, sleepy-eyed and vulnerable in her pajamas before she put on her armor of makeup and designer clothes. This was wrong. Marcus knew it was wrong. So he did what he'd always done with inconvenient emotions. He buried them, ignored them, told himself they would pass. But suppressed feelings don't disappear. They just wait, growing stronger in the darkness until they find a crack to escape through. And for Marcus, that crack appeared in the 3rd week, the night Isabella went on a date. His name was James Sullivan, investment banker, Yale graduate, member of Isabella's social circle. He picked her up at 7 in a Tesla and a Tom Ford suit, flashing a smile that Marcus immediately hated. "This is Marcus, my bodyguard," Isabella introduced them, her voice light. James extended his hand. Must be an interesting job, following around a beautiful woman all day. Marcus shook his hand, firmly enough to make a point, and said nothing. Professional protocol dictated that Marcus maintain a discreet distance during dates. He sat 3 tables away at the restaurant, close enough to intervene if necessary, far enough to provide the illusion of privacy. But he heard everything. He heard James' mediocre jokes and Isabella's polite laughter, heard him name-drop and humble-brag and perform the elaborate social dance of a man trying to seem impressive, Heard Isabella respond with practiced charm, the same charm she used for interviews and social media. None of it was real. Marcus could tell. He knew the difference between Isabella's genuine laugh and her performance laugh. Knew when she was actually interested versus when she was being courteous. James Sullivan didn't know her at all. Couldn't see past her beautiful surface to the brilliant, complicated woman underneath. He was like everyone else in Isabella's orbit, attracted to the image, oblivious to the person. But Marcus knew her, really knew her. And watching her waste her evening on someone so unworthy sparked something dark and possessive in his chest. Something he'd never felt before. Something that whispered, she deserves better. She deserves someone who actually sees her. She deserves you. Marcus crushed that thought immediately, forced himself to focus on the job, on scanning the restaurant for threats, on maintaining his professional distance. But when James leaned across the table and touched Isabella's hand, Marcus's jaw clenched so hard he thought his teeth might crack. The date ended at 10:30. James walked Isabella to her building entrance where Marcus was waiting. He leaned in for a kiss. Isabella turned slightly so it landed on her cheek instead of her lips, and then he was gone. In the elevator up to her penthouse, Isabella kicked off her heels with a sigh. "Well, that was exhausting," she said, more to herself than to Marcus. "You didn't enjoy yourself?" The question came out before Marcus could stop it. Personal, unprofessional. Isabella glanced at him, surprised. Marcus rarely initiated conversation. "He was fine," she said with a shrug. I don't know. Sometimes I feel like people don't actually want to know me. They want to know the idea of me, you know." She looked at Marcus like she expected him to understand. And God help him, he did. "Yes," he said quietly, "I know." Something passed between them in that moment, something that should have stayed buried, a recognition, a connection. Isabella smiled, her real smile, the one that made her eyes crinkle at the corners, and Marcus felt something crack open inside his chest. That was the moment everything changed. Because now Marcus wasn't just protecting Isabella, he was protecting his Isabella. The woman only he truly knew, the woman who belonged. He stopped that thought before it could fully form, but it was too late. The seed had been planted. Over the following weeks, Marcus's behavior began to shift. Subtle changes at first, nothing Isabella would notice, nothing anyone would notice. He started positioning himself between Isabella and other men at events, standing closer than necessary, his hand hovering near the small of her back, not quite touching but claiming nonetheless. He began offering opinions on her schedule, suggesting she skip certain parties, questioning whether certain friends really had her best interests at heart. "Daniel's been your friend for 5 years, Isabella said, confused, when Marcus suggested limiting time with one of her closest friends. "Why are you concerned about him?" "I noticed he takes photos of you when you're not looking," Marcus said smoothly. "Posts them without your permission. I'm concerned about your privacy." It was true, Daniel had done that, but it wasn't the reason Marcus wanted him gone. Marcus wanted him gone because Daniel made Isabella laugh in a way that made Marcus's chest tight with jealousy. But Isabella trusted Marcus's professional judgment, so she pulled back from Daniel. Marcus also started implementing new security protocols that just happened to isolate Isabella further, suggesting she work from home more, limiting her time in public spaces, reviewing her guest list and finding reasons to exclude people. "I'm not sure the benefit of attending that gallery opening outweighs the security risk," he would say. "Too many variables, too many exits to monitor. Maybe skip this one." Each suggestion made sense in isolation. Each was professionally reasonable. But together, they formed a pattern Isabella didn't see. Marcus was slowly cutting her off from the outside world. Not to protect her from her stalker. To keep her for himself. The stalker, ironically, had almost been forgotten. The letters had stopped coming 3 weeks earlier. Police thought perhaps the show of professional security had scared him off. Isabella's manager suggested they could probably scale back the protection details soon. Marcus disagreed strongly. The absence of contact doesn't mean the threat is gone, he argued. It could mean he's planning something bigger. We need to maintain current protocols, possibly increase them. He provided statistics, case studies, expert opinions, all valid, all professional, all designed to keep him exactly where he was, in Isabella's home, in her life, watching her every moment. But statistics and protocols weren't the real reason Marcus wanted to stay. The real reason was much simpler and infinitely more dangerous. He had fallen completely, obsessively, irrevocably in love with a woman he could never have. And he had decided that didn't matter. Because in Marcus's mind, shaped by years of military discipline and absolute control, love was just another objective to achieve, another mission to accomplish, another problem to solve. He just needed the right strategy. The breaking point came on a Friday night in late May. Isabella had been hired to photograph a celebrity wedding in the Hamptons, a 3-day assignment that would require staying overnight at the venue. Marcus, of course, accompanied her. The wedding was extravagant, the kind of event where everyone was either famous, wealthy, or both. Isabella worked the reception with her usual grace, capturing moments with an artist's eye, completely in her element. Marcus watched from the perimeter, tracking potential threats, maintaining his professional distance, until he saw Isabella laughing with the best man. His name was Christopher Torres, actor, philanthropist, devastatingly handsome, and clearly charmed by Isabella. Marcus watched them talk, watched Christopher lean in close to say something that made Isabella throw her head back and laugh, her real laugh, watched him touch her arm, watched her not pull away. Something dark and violent surged through Marcus's chest, a possessiveness so intense it felt like fury. She's mine, his mind screamed. Mine to protect, mine to watch, mine. He forced himself to remain still, professional, but inside he was fracturing. The reception ended near midnight. Isabella and Marcus drove back to their hotel in silence. She was tired, pleasantly buzzed from champagne, humming softly to herself. Marcus's knuckles were white on the steering wheel. At the hotel, Isabella's room and Marcus's were adjoining, standard security protocol. She said goodnight and disappeared into her room, leaving the connecting door slightly ajar as always, just in case. Marcus stood in his room, hands clenched at his sides, trying to regain control. He had spent his entire adult life mastering himself, controlling his emotions, maintaining discipline. But all that control had a cost. And the cost was building pressure, years of suppressed desires and denied needs, all focused now on one person. Isabella. Marcus told himself to breathe, to meditate, to do the exercises he'd learned in therapy years ago. But the darkness in his chest wouldn't quiet. It whispered poisonous truths. She doesn't need James or Christopher or any of them. She needs you. You're the only one who really sees her. You're the only one who could truly protect her, truly love her, truly appreciate her. She just doesn't know it yet. At 1:30 in the morning, Marcus heard Isabella's door open, heard her footsteps padding toward the minibar, heard the clink of a bottle, the splash of water. He should have stayed in his room, should have maintained his professional boundary. Instead, he knocked softly on the connecting door. Marcus, Isabella's voice was surprised. Is everything okay? I need to talk to you about Christopher Torres, he said, pushing the door open before she could respond. Isabella was in pajamas, her hair down, makeup removed, vulnerable and real in a way that made Marcus's chest ache. Christopher, the best man, what about him? He asked for your number. Okay, Isabella looked confused. Is that a security concern? I told him no. Now Isabella's expression shifted. You told him no? Marcus, that's not your decision to make. He's not right for you. Excuse me. Her voice had an edge now. You don't get to decide who's right for me. He's an actor, lives in LA. He's been photographed with a different woman every month for the past year. He's exactly like every other man in your orbit, attracted to your image, not who you actually are. And you know who I actually am. Isabella's tone was sharp now, but something else flickered in her eyes, something like uncertainty. Yes, Marcus stepped closer. I know you hate large crowds, but you force yourself to attend events because it's good for your career. I know you're terrified of being alone, but even more terrified of being with the wrong person. I know you cry during animated movies, but never during dramas. I know you talk to your grandmother's photo when you're stressed. I know everything about you, Isabella. That's your job, she said, but her voice wavered. You're supposed to know my patterns for security purposes. This isn't about security. Marcus's voice dropped lower, rougher. Not anymore. The air between them charged with tension. Isabella took a step back. Marcus, what are you saying? I'm saying that for 12 weeks I've watched you, protected you, learned you, and somewhere along the way this stopped being just a job. Stop. Isabella's voice was firm now. Whatever you're about to say, don't. But Marcus couldn't stop. All the control he'd maintained for weeks, years, his entire life, it was crumbling. And beneath it was raw, desperate need. I see you, Isabella, really see you. Not the celebrity photographer, not the Instagram influencer. You, the woman who's so damn lonely she keeps a bodyguard close just to have someone who understands her. The woman who deserves so much more than the shallow people in her orbit. You're crossing a line, Isabella said, moving toward her phone. A serious line. I think you should leave. I can't leave. Marcus's hands clenched at his sides. Don't you understand? I can't leave because He stopped himself before saying the words, but they hung in the air anyway. Oh my God. Isabella's eyes widened with realization and fear. You think you're in love with me. I don't think I know. Marcus, you're not in love with me. You're obsessed with me. There's a difference. Her voice was shaking now. This is textbook, proximity, intensity, isolation. You've been spending all your time with me, living in my space, and your brain has confused professional responsibility with emotional attachment. She was right. Some distant, rational part of Marcus knew she was right. But that part was being drowned out by everything else, by the intensity of what he felt, by the certainty that what he felt was real. This isn't confusion, Marcus said quietly, dangerously. This is the most clear I've ever been about anything. You need to leave. Now, I'm terminating your contract effective immediately. Isabella. Now Marcus. For a long moment, they stared at each other. Marcus could see the fear in her eyes, the fear of him, and that hurt worse than anything. But beneath the hurt was something darker, something that whispered, she's scared because she feels it too. She knows you're right. She knows you're the only one who really sees her. She just needs time to understand. Marcus turned and left the room without another word, packed his bag in silence, walked out of the hotel at 2 in the morning. But he didn't go home. He parked his car down the street and watched Isabella's hotel window. Because even if she didn't want his presence, she still needed his protection. That's what Marcus told himself as he sat in his car through the night, eyes fixed on her window. But the truth was simpler and more terrifying. He couldn't leave because he couldn't bear to not be watching her. The obsession he'd been fighting, controlling, suppressing, it had won. And Isabella Chen had no idea that firing her bodyguard had only made things infinitely more dangerous. Isabella returned to Manhattan the next morning, shaken but determined. She called her manager, David, immediately. I fired Marcus. I need a new security detail. Immediately. What? Why? Marcus is the best. He crossed a line, David. A serious line. I need him replaced today. David pulled strings. By that evening, Isabella had a new bodyguard, a woman named Isabella Chen, former FBI, impeccable credentials, professional distance, no complications. Isabella breathed easier. She'd handled the situation, set a boundary, moved on. She had no idea Marcus had never left. For the first few days, Marcus told himself he was just making sure the transition to the new bodyguard went smoothly, that he was monitoring from a distance to ensure Isabella remained safe. But he never contacted Sarah, never briefed her on the stalking case, never handed off his files. Instead, he watched, He parked outside Isabella's building, followed at a distance when she left, used his security contacts to monitor her digital footprint, checked her social media obsessively. He told himself it was temporary, that he just needed to wean himself off gradually. That cold turkey would be too difficult after 12 weeks of constant proximity. But days turned into a week turned into 2. And Marcus's behavior escalated. He started showing up places he knew she'd be, the coffee shop near her studio, the gym she used, the restaurant where she met friends for dinner, never close enough for her to see him, but close enough to watch. He told himself he was protecting her, that Sarah Chen was competent but not as thorough as him, that Isabella was still in danger from her original stalker. But the stalker's letters had never resumed. Police had closed the case, deciding it was likely someone who'd gotten scared off by the security presence. There was no threat, except the one Marcus had become. In his apartment, paid for but barely lived in, Marcus set up a command center. Photos of Isabella covered one wall, her schedule meticulously tracked, her social media posts printed and analyzed, her friends' profiles investigated. He knew this looked crazy. If anyone saw this, they would call police, call a psychiatrist, call someone. But nobody saw it because Marcus lived alone, had always lived alone, had built a life of perfect isolation that now made his obsession invisible. That's the thing about people trained in surveillance, in covert operations, in maintaining cover. When they break, nobody notices until it's too late. Marcus started keeping a journal. Not about his feelings. He'd learned in military therapy that feelings were unreliable, chemical, meaningless. No, he journaled about Isabella, about patterns he noticed, observations, analysis. May 29th, Isabella had lunch with her mother, seemed tense. Later spent 3 hours in her studio, working alone. I observed from the building across the street. She looked sad. She needs support but won't ask for it. This is why she needs someone who understands her without being asked. May 30th, Isabella posted on Instagram about taking time for self-care. But she's lying. I can tell from the micro-expressions in her photos. She's not okay. Sarah doesn't notice. Sarah just stands there and does nothing. I should be there. I would help her. May 31st, Isabella went to dinner with James Sullivan again. I followed them to the restaurant, watched through the window. She laughed twice, both times fake. Why does she waste time with people who don't deserve her, who don't see her? The rational part of Marcus's brain knew this was wrong. Knew he had become exactly what he'd been hired to protect Isabella from, a stalker. Someone obsessed. Someone crossing boundaries. But the rational part was quiet now, drowned out by the overwhelming certainty that he was right. That what he felt was real. That Isabella needed him even if she didn't know it. Besides, he wasn't like her original stalker. That person had been threatening, dangerous. Marcus would never hurt Isabella. He loved her. He just wanted to keep her safe, to be near her, to watch over her. That's not stalking, his mind insisted. That's devotion. But devotion and obsession are separated by the thinnest of lines. And Marcus had crossed it without even noticing. 3 weeks after being fired, Marcus made his first serious mistake. He hacked Isabella's cloud storage. It wasn't difficult. He'd set up most of her security protocols himself, knew her backup passwords. He told himself he was just checking to make sure her data was secure, that Sarah hadn't left any vulnerabilities. But once he was in, he couldn't stop looking. Her photos, thousands of them. Professional work, personal snapshots, selfies she'd never posted. He saved them all, organized them by date, by location, by subject. He read her emails, her text messages, her private journal entries stored in a password-protected document. In those entries, he found her fears, her doubts, her loneliness. And he found entries about him. June 2nd, still thinking about Marcus. I handled that situation, right? He crossed a line. I had to fire him, but part of me wonders if I overreacted. He was just honest about his feelings. Is that really so terrible? No, that's stupid. He was my employee. There's a power dynamic. He was inappropriate. I did the right thing. June 5th, why do I keep looking at the door expecting Marcus to walk through it? Sarah is competent, professional, but I feel less safe somehow. That doesn't make sense. Marcus was becoming unstable. I'm safer now, so why don't I feel safer? June 8th, had a dream about Marcus last night. He was there in my apartment, just standing in the shadows like he used to, watching over me while I slept. I woke up feeling, I don't know, protected. That's messed up. I need to talk to my therapist about this. Marcus read these entries with growing intensity. She thought about him, dreamed about him, felt less safe without him. This proved it, proved that she needed him. That firing him had been a mistake, that she was fighting her own feelings just like he'd initially fought his. All he had to do was show her, make her understand. So Marcus did something he would never have considered 3 months earlier, something that would have horrified the professional bodyguard he used to be. He broke into her apartment. It was a Tuesday night. Sarah Chen had gone off duty at 10 p.m. Isabella was home alone, working in her studio. Marcus still had copies of all her keys, a fact he'd never disclosed when returning his security access. He let himself in silently at 11:30, using skills learned in military special operations to move through the apartment like a ghost. He didn't plan to confront her, didn't plan to do anything except be there, watch over her like he used to, prove that she still needed his protection. But as he stood in the shadowed hallway, watching Isabella work through her open studio door, completely unaware of his presence, something shifted in Marcus's chest. This was wrong, deeply, irrevocably wrong. What was he doing? Breaking into her home, stalking her, monitoring her private communications. The clarity hit him like a physical blow. He had become the villain in his own story, the threat he'd been hired to eliminate. He had become her stalker. Marcus backed toward the door silently, preparing to leave, to never come back, to finally let go, and knocked over a vase in the hallway. The crash shattered the silence. Isabella's studio door flew open. She stood backlit in the doorway, phone in her hand, looking directly at the shadowy figure in her hallway. For a frozen moment, neither moved. Then Isabella screamed. Marcus raised his hands, stepped into the light. "Isabella, it's me. It's okay." "Get out," her voice was raw with terror. "Get out or I'm calling the police." "I'm not going to hurt you. I would never." "You broke into my home." Her phone was to her ear now. "Yes, police. There's an intruder in my apartment. 1422 Park Avenue, Penthouse B, please hurry." "Isabella, please. I just wanted to protect you. I just wanted." "You wanted?" Her fear was morphing into fury now. "What you wanted? Marcus, do you hear yourself? You sound exactly like the stalker you were hired to protect me from." The words hit Marcus like bullets, each one finding its mark, because she was right. He had spent weeks telling himself he was different, that his feelings were real, pure, justified, that he understood Isabella in a way nobody else did. But the truth was simple and devastating. He was just another man who thought he knew what was best for her, just another man who couldn't hear no, just another man who had decided his desires mattered more than her autonomy. "I'm sorry," Marcus said, his voice breaking. "I'm so sorry, I didn't mean, I never meant to." Sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer. "You need to leave," Isabella said, tears streaming down her face now. "Right now, Marcus. If you ever cared about me at all, if any of what you said was real, you'll leave." Marcus looked at her one last time, at the woman he'd convinced himself he loved, at the terror and betrayal in her eyes, terror he had caused. He turned and left, took the stairs instead of the elevator, exited through the parking garage, was gone before the police arrived. He drove to his apartment in a daze, looked at the wall covered in photos, the journal filled with observations, the laptop full of stolen data. And finally, Marcus saw himself clearly. Not as a protector, not as someone who understood her, not as her savior or her soulmate. As the monster he'd become. He called 911 himself at 3 a.m. "My name is Marcus Rivera. I need to report a crime. I've been stalking someone. I broke into her home. I have her private data. I need help. The dispatcher sounded confused. Sir, are you confessing to a crime? Yes, and I'm confessing that I need psychiatric help. I'm a danger to someone He couldn't say love, not anymore. Someone I've been harassing. I need to be stopped before I do something worse. 2 hours later, police arrested Marcus without incident. He cooperated fully. Gave them everything, the keys, the passwords, the journal, the photos. Waived his rights. Confessed to stalking, harassment, unlawful surveillance, trespassing. His lawyer argued for psychiatric evaluation instead of jail time. Argued that Marcus was a decorated veteran having a breakdown, not a predatory criminal. The judge disagreed. Marcus Rivera was sentenced to 18 months in prison, followed by 5 years probation, mandatory psychiatric treatment, a permanent restraining order keeping him at least 1,000 feet from Isabella Chen at all times. Isabella testified at the sentencing hearing. Marcus sat and listened as she described the fear he'd caused, the violation she'd felt, the way she no longer felt safe in her own home. I trusted him, she said, her voice steady but her hands shaking. I let him into my life, my home, my privacy, and he twisted that trust into something ugly. He convinced himself that his obsession was love, that surveillance was protection, that my fear was just confusion about my own feelings. She looked directly at Marcus then. You didn't love me, you don't even know what love is. Love respects boundaries, love accepts no. Love doesn't install cameras and break into homes and steal private data. What you felt wasn't love, it was ownership, possession, control. Marcus had nothing to say. She was right about everything. As the bailiff led him away, Marcus looked back one more time. Isabella was being comforted by her mother, by David, by friends. She looked small and tired and wounded. But she looked free. And Marcus finally understood that his presence in her life, the thing he'd convinced himself she needed, had been nothing but a cage. Now you might be thinking, this is an extreme case. This is what happens when someone mentally unstable gets put in a position of power. But here's what makes this story so disturbing. Marcus Rivera wasn't mentally unstable. He passed psychological screenings, had no history of violence or stalking, was by all accounts a professional, disciplined individual. So what went wrong? To understand that, we need to look at the psychological patterns that turn protection into obsession, because they're more common and more insidious than most people realize. Let me share some data that should terrify you. According to a 2023 study by the Protective Intelligence and Threat Assessment Center, approximately 11% of close protection officers report developing inappropriate attachment to their clients. Most never act on it, but 11% is more than 1 in 10. Another study found that in cases of stalking by security personnel, professional bodyguards, or law enforcement, the average time from initial warning signs to serious escalation is just 6 weeks. 6 weeks. That's how quickly professional distance can crumble, how quickly protection becomes possession. But here's the part that should really concern you. In 73% of these cases, friends and family of the victim reported noticing concerning behavior but dismissed it because he's a professional or he's just doing his job. We're trained to trust security personnel, to see their invasive presence as necessary, to accept surveillance, monitoring, and control as the price of safety. And predators know this. Now, Marcus wasn't a predator in the traditional sense. He didn't plan to become obsessed. He genuinely believed he was protecting Isabella even as he violated her in every possible way. But that's what makes this pattern so dangerous. It doesn't require malicious intent. It just requires proximity, access, and a slow erosion of boundaries. Let me break down the psychological progression. Stage 1, professional attachment. The bodyguard or security personnel begins to identify strongly with their client's safety. They take pride in their ability to protect. Their identity becomes tied to the client's well-being. This is normal and even desirable initially. Stage 2, personal investment. The security personnel begins to see the client as a person rather than an assignment. They notice details beyond security-relevant information. They start to care about the client's emotional state, happiness, preferences, still manageable at this stage. Stage 3, protective possessiveness. The security personnel begins to see others in the client's life as threats, not security threats, but personal threats. They believe others don't truly care about or understand the client. They position themselves as the only one who really gets the client. Stage 4, boundary erosion. Professional protocols are gradually relaxed or violated, not dramatically, just small things, staying a little closer than necessary, commenting on personal matters, subtly isolating the client from others. Each violation is rationalized as being in the client's best interest. Stage 5, obsessive attachment. The security personnel can no longer distinguish between professional duty and personal need. They genuinely believe their presence is essential to the client's well-being. They interpret any attempt to create distance as a threat, either to the client's safety or to their connection. Stage 6, stalking behavior. After removal from the position, the security personnel cannot accept the separation. They continue surveillance, convinced they're still protecting the client. They may break laws, violate privacy, or escalate to confrontation, all while maintaining the delusion that their actions are justified by love or duty. This is the pattern Marcus followed. And the terrifying part? It's the same pattern followed by dozens of security stalkers every year. But there's another parallel worth examining: the psychology of surveillance itself. When someone watches you constantly, monitoring your movements, your communications, your habits, something happens to both parties. The watcher begins to feel they know you intimately. And sometimes, the watched begins to depend on that watchful presence. Psychologists call this surveillance dependency, and it's increasingly common in our modern world. Think about it, we live in an era of constant monitoring. Our phones track our locations. Our smart homes record our activities. Social media documents our lives. Ring cameras watch our doorsteps. Alexa listens in our homes. We're all being watched all the time, and we've convinced ourselves it's for our own good, for convenience, for security, for safety. But surveillance, even consensual, even necessary surveillance, changes the relationship between watcher and watched. Isabella's journal entries revealed something crucial. She had begun to feel less safe without Marcus's presence, not because the threat had increased, but because she'd become psychologically dependent on being watched. That's not safety. That's captivity wearing the mask of protection. And it's everywhere in modern life. How many people feel anxious without their phone's location services active? How many feel unsafe in homes without security cameras? How many check their Ring doorbell compulsively, unable to relax unless they can surveil their own doorstep? We've been taught that visibility equals safety, that being watched means being protected. But sometimes the watcher is the threat. Let me share another disturbing statistic. In 2024, there were over 3,000 reported cases of protective stalking behavior by individuals in security, law enforcement, or protective roles. And those are just the reported cases. Experts estimate the actual number is 10 times higher. Because here's the problem with protective stalking: it's hard to identify and even harder to prove. When your bodyguard follows you everywhere, that's his job. When he knows your schedule, that's security protocol. When he monitors your communications, that's threat assessment. When he positions himself between you and others, that's protection. Until suddenly it isn't. Until suddenly all those normal security behaviors have become something sinister. But by then, the pattern is so established that recognizing the shift feels impossible. Isabella didn't realize she was being stalked until Marcus broke into her apartment. Even though the signs had been there for weeks, the isolation, the possessiveness, the jealousy disguised as security concerns. She didn't see it because she'd been taught that his behavior was normal. That invasive monitoring was the price of protection. that his intimate knowledge of her life was professional, not personal. And that's the final parallel I want to draw between Marcus's surveillance of Isabella and our society's surveillance of everyone. We accept constant monitoring because we're told it's for our safety. We surrender privacy because we're told it's the price of security. We allow corporations, governments, and platforms to watch our every move because we're told the alternative is chaos and danger. But what if the surveillance itself is the danger? What if the watchers, whether individual bodyguards or massive tech companies, develop the same obsessive attachment Marcus did? What if they convince themselves they know what's best for us, that they need to protect us from ourselves, that our objections are just confusion about what we really need? That's not a dystopian future. That's our present reality. And Isabella Chen's story is a microcosm of something much larger, the danger of surrendering autonomy in the name of safety. So what can we learn from Isabella and Marcus's story? What are the lessons that might protect you or someone you love from a similar situation? Isabella's instincts told her something was wrong weeks before Marcus broke into her apartment. She felt uncomfortable with his jealousy, confused by his opinions about her personal life, uncertain about the increasing isolation. But she dismissed those feelings because Marcus was a professional, because his behavior seemed justified by security concerns, because she'd been taught to trust the expert. Here's the truth: your discomfort is data. When someone's behavior makes you uneasy, even if that person is in a position of authority, even if their actions seem professionally justified, pay attention. Red flags to watch for: security personnel who seem jealous of your other relationships. Isolation disguised as protection. Personal opinions offered on non-security matters. Surveillance that feels excessive or intrusive. Resistance to being replaced or having their access reduced. Knowledge of intimate details they shouldn't need to know. If your bodyguard, security system, or protective measure starts to feel like a cage rather than a shield, trust that feeling. Because the line between protection and control is thinner than most people realize. Marcus genuinely believed he loved Isabella. He felt it intensely, powerfully, undeniably. And because he felt it so strongly, he assumed it must be real. But feelings are not facts. Intensity is not authenticity. And obsession is not love. Real love respects autonomy. Real love accepts boundaries. Real love can hear no without crumbling into resentment or escalation. What Marcus felt was attachment, specifically, an anxious, obsessive attachment born from proximity and access. He knew intimate details about Isabella's life, which created an illusion of intimacy. But intimacy without consent is not connection, it's violation. This pattern appears everywhere. The fan who feels they know, a celebrity from social media. The coworker who misinterprets professional friendliness as romantic interest. The person who believes their intense feelings justify violating boundaries. The stalker who insists, "You'll understand once you know how much I love you." If your feelings for someone require them to change their mind, overlook boundary violations, or accept your presence against their wishes, that's not love. That's ownership. And ownership of another human being is always wrong, no matter how it feels. The most insidious lesson from this story is how surveillance itself transforms both parties. Marcus didn't set out to become a stalker. He was a professional, trained, decorated veteran. But constant surveillance, watching someone's every move, knowing their every habit, seeing them in their most vulnerable moments, changed him. Surveillance creates intimacy without consent. It gives the watcher knowledge and power they haven't earned, and that imbalance corrupts. But surveillance also changes the watched. Isabella began to depend on Marcus's presence, to feel unsafe without his surveillance, to doubt her own judgment about threats because the expert was always there to assess for her. This is happening on a massive scale in modern society. We're all being watched by our devices, our platforms, our governments, our corporations, and that surveillance is changing us. We're losing our ability to exist without being observed. We're becoming dependent on the watchers. We're surrendering autonomy in exchange for the illusion of security. And just like Isabella, we may not realize we're trapped until the door closes and we can't get out. So here's my challenge to you. Examine your relationship with surveillance, with being watched, with the devices and services and people that monitor you for your own good. Ask yourself, does this surveillance make me genuinely safer or just feel safer? Am I surrendering important autonomy in exchange for this protection? Who has access to this information, and what could they do with it? If I wanted to stop being watched, could I? Because the fundamental question isn't whether surveillance can sometimes be necessary. It's whether we're accepting far more of it than necessary. Whether we're so afraid of potential threats that we've welcomed actual threats into our lives. Marcus Rivera was a threat Isabella invited in. She gave him keys, access, trust, all because she was afraid of a stranger's letters. But the stranger never hurt her. Marcus did. And maybe that's the warning we all need to hear. Sometimes the protection is more dangerous than the threat. 6 months after Marcus Rivera went to prison, Isabella Chen gave her first interview about the experience. She was asked if she regretted hearing him, if there were warning signs she'd missed, if she felt foolish for not seeing it coming. Her answer was both simple and profound. The scariest part wasn't that he fooled me, it's that he fooled himself. Marcus genuinely believed he was protecting me even as he violated every boundary I had. He convinced himself that surveillance was love, that control was care, that possession was protection. And because his conviction was so complete, so sincere, it was almost impossible to see through it until it was too late. She paused, then added, "But I think that's true for all of us now. We're all being watched by people and systems that insist it's for our own good, that know intimate details about our lives and convince us that knowledge keeps us safe. And we believe it because we're scared of the alternatives." "But maybe," Isabella said, "maybe the thing we should be most scared of is the surveillance itself." I think she's right. Because here's what this story ultimately reveals. The most dangerous threats are often the ones we invite in, the ones we trust, the ones we give keys and passwords and access to our lives. Marcus Rivera wasn't a monster. He was a professional who slowly, gradually, almost imperceptibly crossed lines until he'd transformed into the very thing he was hired to prevent. And if it can happen to someone as trained and disciplined as Marcus, if someone that qualified can convince themselves that obsession is protection, then none of the systems we trust are truly safe. Not our security services, not our surveillance technologies, not our platforms that only want to keep us safe, not our governments that promise protection in exchange for privacy. Because all surveillance, no matter how well-intentioned, creates the conditions for obsession, for possession, for control. And once you've surrendered your autonomy, once you've accepted that being watched is normal, necessary, even comforting, getting it back becomes almost impossible. So let me leave you with one final question, the same question Isabella Chen had to answer for herself. What are you willing to surrender in the name of safety? And once you've surrendered it, who decides if you ever get it back? If this story resonated with you, or if it made you think differently about protection, surveillance, and autonomy, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever experienced a situation where protection felt like control? Have you noticed these patterns in your own life or in society at large? Share your perspective. I read every comment. And if you found this analysis valuable, please consider subscribing to the channel. We tell stories that make you think, question assumptions, and see patterns you might have missed. Hit that notification bell so you don't miss the next story, because next time, we're diving into an even darker question. What happens when the person you trust most becomes the person you should fear most? Until then, stay safe, stay aware, and remember, not everyone who promises to protect you has your best interests at heart. Thank you for watching.